Welcome to another episode of the Experience Edge, where this is your guide to the sharpest ideas in customer experience today. We just announced our strategic alliance with Deloitte, so I just had to sit down with Challicom from Deloitte Digital UK to dig into how AI is actually reshaping customer journeys in financial services, and also why journeys are becoming like the data model AI finally makes sense of, how agents are starting to back up the human journey owner, and then why a bank that's known you for 20 years still treats you as 5 different people. So much good stuff in this episode. I really hope you enjoy it. Today, I have Julia Challicom on the podcast. She is at Deloitte Digital, leading customer strategy and design for financial services. She helps banks, insurers, and wealth management firms transform customer experience and design customer-led services. And today, she specializes in customer journey management, transforming the way her clients work with AI and shaping how customer insights actually inform business outcomes, creating repeatability across all these different functions that need to rally together around the customer, which is more important than ever now that everything is changing and customer experience is becoming conversational. What I like, even though she runs a business inside Deloitte, that she's always championing responsible and inclusive design, which I'm sure we're going to get into today. Julia, welcome. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting. And I want to jump straight in because you're seeing some of the biggest organizations in the UK changing the way they are expecting customer understanding to actually like work in their business, right? They want speed because AI can just understand all of it at the same time. But also they want to have deeper insight because all that data now becomes accessible, right? But it's almost like you can't have both. So what are you seeing? Like, where does that pressure actually break when you're thinking about your clients?
So there's actually a lot of tension points within the organizations that I'm working with at the moment. There's a real like top-down drive to go faster. I think a lot of people have taken on the LinkedIn hype, right? Why are we not going faster? Why are we still taking a long time to get things to market? And I think that the pressure points are numerous. They are kind of at the decision points. They're at the funding points, which are not quite, not quite aligned to how like an agile team might want to run. They're at at the research, at the data points, as you mentioned, sort of still trying to get hold of the right data, be it kind of secondary data or primary data with your actual customers, and getting that at the right date at the right moments and at the right points is proving really, really challenging. And then the actual kind of ideation, coming up with the ideas, getting them approved, getting them through all of the approval processes, and then also kind of getting them delivered as well. So I think the pressure points are numerous, but what I'm really seeing is that on the ground, like each of those individual teams are championing kind of how they can accelerate their work, how can they improve things on a kind of team by team basis, on a craft by craft basis, if you like. But where the real magic comes in is when you can link all of those things together and kind of speed up all of the teams kind of in unison. But I think what we're finding is some teams, like development teams, really want to kind of accelerate and move forward at pace. And they've been given the tools to do it. But some other teams, like the design teams, are really kind of still struggling to get some of those tools in so they can accelerate their work as well. So you've got like a real tension between lots of the different teams in an organization.
Yeah, what I'm seeing as well is like because engineering or development can just go at twice or sometimes 4 times the speed that they used to, they're doing it, but that doesn't mean like they're doing the right things, right? They're just doing more things and they're delivering them faster. Quality is debatable, but that's another topic. However, the risk, and that's what I'm seeing in most enterprises, is that backlog of work was not necessarily aligned to like the biggest customer problems, or it wasn't aligned to like the actual business outcomes that we're striving towards. So connecting the dots is more important. So let's talk about the data piece, because what are you seeing? Is it a data access problem? I mean, the data is everywhere, it's scattered across many different tools. It's a matter of like no one has the right permissions or authorization, and the teams that are responsible for getting that in, they are clogged, their backlogs are full. Is that the problem? Or is it a data quality problem, or both? Like, what are you seeing?
I think it's everything, to be honest. So I think You've got some organizations that have made a lot of investments recently into their data platforms, and some that are still on the journey to do that. You've got huge sort of data lakes. You're creating new data products to allow organizations to have access to that within the firms themselves. And so all of that is improving, but they've still got a long way to go. Like, there is not one client that I go into that doesn't say that they have like data issues that are preventing them from doing things. And that is everyone from like the actual kind of data architectural, like the data part of the enterprise, but then also the business as well, which is kind of fighting with the data teams to try and get the right, extract the right data at the right granularity for the work that they need to do. And that can be everything, right, from like very specific, like wanting to get very specific about certain segments and how they access the journey and what their specific pain points are, but actually like the data just hasn't been set up in the right way to allow them to do that. And so that has kind of ramifications across the board. So the business get frustrated. The business might look to different data sources or different ways to bring that in. You get little cottage industries springing up, and then you get the data team that are frustrated because nobody's using like the products and services that they have created because they're not quite fit for purpose. So there's a bit of a disconnect, I think, but I think everybody is feeling the pain, certainly, of the right data. And what that means is that either to your point, we're building products and services that don't have the right level of kind of granularity in the insights that we have built them on, or it's taking a really long time to create the reporting that we need to back up and give the business, the validation that we are creating the right things. And so that you're spending a long time kind of, pulling together all of those insights, pulling together the right things, when that should really be really, really seamless. Or you have a product owner that's looking at like 4 or 5 different tools because they're looking at like the campaign that they've just done, and then they're looking at the analytics that are on that particular journey, and then they're looking at maybe their business data on kind of how like many customers they've got on a specific part of the journey. So they're having to look at 4, 5, 6 different systems, and that's taking an awful lot of their time as well. Whereas if this had been a lot more seamless and a lot more kind of collected together, then it would all it would save a lot of people's time, and then that would accelerate them, right? You don't necessarily need a fancy AI tool to do that, right? You just need better infrastructure and better thought around those products and those data products in the first place.
Yeah, it's a little bit of the other tension that you're describing here, where for the last 20 years or so, like all these enterprises have been teaching themselves to be agile, right? I mean, the whole point of being agile is like being swift and like jumping on like the needs of the day, or like being like literally agile to change when that is required. So now we have AI, and all these teams are doing, to your point, like cottage farm style initiatives. They're bringing their own ways of working to life with AI. Now, the problem of that is it doesn't scale. But if we go and ask for leadership to give guidance, to build the infrastructure, to support it, to fund it, we might be 2 years in before we have something meaningful. So how do you advise your clients to like get a meaningful start, but not get this like sprawl everywhere that ultimately is creating a new problem on its own?
Yeah, well, I think what I normally talk or normally really trying to reinforce from the beginning with my clients is this needs to be a top-down strategy, right? And bear in mind that a lot of the clients that I'm working with are sort of tier one, like large-scale banks, and so they're huge organizations made up of kind of many different departments, customer departments, and so kind of getting that top-down mandate is quite difficult, I think, because they've all got their own ideas of how they want to do things, but also like super important, because that's what gives you the mandate, and then the kind of the drive to build that strategic infrastructure that you need in order to create like an enterprise, sort of like an events driven enterprise, for example. So talking to some banks about moving to more of like an events-driven architecture, but actually like that is such a fundamental shift in how they work that it's it's a 5, it's a 10-year project to get there, and that kind of investment, that kind of leap is sort of unfathomable for the kind of the smaller teams on the ground, but so desperately needed, right? Because in order to realize their dreams, they need to, you need to start at the beginning with those kind of infrastructure projects. But to your earlier point, right, what that, you know, they can't wait for a 5-year infrastructure project to turn the whole thing down. They want to start now. So there's quite a lot of tension there, but it always comes back to strategy, right? Being really clear, what is the strategy? What are you aiming for? How are you going to get there? And then make sure that is distilled down to every level of the organization, so they know how they're laddering up to that strategy. You know, the channel strategy is something that I find that often trips up an organization. So what is like the customer service center channel strategy? You know, how are we going to use the call centers? How are we going to use the you know, like a bit more of a chat-based system? Like, how are we going to use our branch network if it's a bank or a building society? And being super clear on how you want to drive traffic to all of those particular channels, and then making sure that distills down into each of the journeys so they know what they should be building for. And that is a disconnect that I see sort of time and time again.
So why is when you think about like shifting towards an event-driven architecture, then we have the AI layer on top of that, and then we're also seeing like many of these large financial institutions shift their org model or their way of working to a journey-based model, right? You mentioned a lot of journey already, where teams are supposed to be understanding like how, whatever their channel they're working in or the function they belong to, like how that fits the broader customer experience and therefore the journey, right? So why is that so important right now?
The move towards a more journey-centric way of working happened sort of gradually, I would say, over the past 10 years. I think originally there were a lot of organizations that were not customer-centric, and that will probably surprise quite a lot of the listeners that are not necessarily in the industry, right? Because why would an organization not want to think about their customers? Why would they not want to put them first? But you would be surprised how some of the organizations sort of set themselves up. But then we've seen a bit more of a movement. So I think Apple was one of the ones that really pioneered like a product-centric organizational model. So they really wanted they were kind of very much kind of aligned to how a customer might buy a product. But now the movement, especially in financial services, is that really customers don't just buy one product, right? There are very few organizations that wouldn't want a customer to buy more than one product from them, unless they only sold one thing. But most of them sell kind of quite a number of products, and they would love it if that one customer bought a number of different products. But actually, we find that quite a lot of the organizations, potentially because, you know, they acquired or they set up different products in different ways, or they acquired different companies, and therefore all of those systems were slightly different. But you'll find that maybe if you apply for a credit card, that would be one way of kind of onboarding as a customer. And then you might want to apply for a mortgage. And sometimes an organization will see you as an entirely new customer, even though you're applying with the same organization. And that onboarding system might be slightly different. And they might ask you for some of the same things again. Like, why are they asking me for my ID when I've been a member or a customer of this particular client, this particular business for like 20 years? Why are they asking me for my ID again? Or why are they asking me for my bank statements? But this happens kind of more often than you would think, and I'm sure we've all experienced that. And so this move towards kind of a much more of a journey-based model is starting to think about actually so what are all the kind of the way that I might want to service you if you wanted to do more of a kind of events-based thing. So I want to buy a home, not I want to sell you a mortgage, I want to buy a home. And if I want to buy a home, what does that mean? Well, it means that I'm going to have to do probably some kind of ID check. Might want a mortgage, but I might need life insurance in order to kind of be a part of that, because now I've got a mortgage in my name. I might want a loan actually, as well as my mortgage, because I might want to think about doing some home extensions once I'm kind of bedded in and I've got there for I'm in there for a couple of years. And then also, you know, I might want to take out some home insurance. And so all of these kinds of products and services that a bank might want to start to offer you as a part of your journey in I want to buy a home, all of a sudden they all need to flow seamlessly. They all need to work seamlessly together. And a lot of organizations, when they started to think like that and started to lift the hood of their journeys, were quite shocked at how difficult it made life for their customers and how difficult it was to do that kind of cross-sell between the different business units or the different kind of product teams. And suddenly they woke up and they went, oh my goodness, this is not great. Like, this is really kind of hampering this. We're treating that customer as 5 different people. Even my systems, like, look, it's have got that particular customer down as 5 different people. And so there is a lot of work going on to, as first of all, kind of align your delivery teams, align your teams away from products and more to that kind of journey-centric way of looking, that events-based way of looking at life. And then also kind of having a think about behind the scenes, how do we tie up that data? So we know, for example, that Julia's got a mortgage and an insurance, but she doesn't yet have a credit card. And maybe we want to think about giving her a current account. And let's have a think about bringing all of those wants together into one single view of the customer so that we can actually see all of the products and services that they have got or what they might want to have next. And so when they call up, we can recognize that how we might want to either upsell or cross-sell or even just help the customer because we knew they had a problem in another part of the bank when they called us back. So there are so many benefits. We could go on for this for the rest of the podcast. There are so many benefits to kind of thinking about that more kind of holistic event-based kind of journey way of life.
Yeah, what I like about how you frame it, like you make it sound very easy, right? And it's like, duh, yes, of course we need to do it like that. But however, like it's really important to understand, like the bank in your case is coming from somewhere, right? They have acquired all these companies, they have all these legacy systems, so like that change overnight doesn't happen. But I'm more curious, like where does it actually start? Because what you are saying is you start actually like from the business, like I want to cross-sell, I want to upsell, I want to basically like increase the products that I'm giving to one of my customers. So it starts from the business usually. Is that true? Does it start from like a data misalignment piece today because we're just putting AI on top of everything, realize like it doesn't work? Or does it actually start from like, hey, there's this business problem and we can actually solve it if we're just more aligned with our teams around the notion of a customer journey? Like where do you find like consistency across your clients with the requests they're coming into you and your teams? Like where does it start?
I think it's very much been a movement, actually. So in the UK, certainly, there have been some kind of real kind of organisations at the forefront of this. So in financial services, there's Lloyds Bank was one of the ones that have really been at the forefront of this, kind of really kind of championing this way. And as they have seen success, kind of as their scores have gone up in kind of customer satisfaction, and you can see their customer base growing. Suddenly that has started a movement between all the others. And then also sort of leadership kind of move around different organizations as well. And when they get to a new organization, they're like, hey, everybody, this is done a lot better, like over the road. Let's, we've seen huge benefits of this over there. I think we can do it better. And so slowly that kind of movement ripples through the rest of the organizations. But then you have, the kind of the fintechs and the startups of the world. You've got those challenger banks coming in who are, who don't have all of that legacy behind them to really slow them down, and so they can set themselves up in a, in this kind of way. So you get, the Monzos and the Starling of the world who come across as much more customer centric because of the way that they are set up and the way that they engage with the customer. And I think that is very much kind of opening the eyes of some of the bigger, larger banks, as I said, that have got kind of a lot more history behind them, but then also a lot more problems to unpick.
If you're enjoying this conversation, don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast channel and leave a review. It makes all the difference. The Experience Edge podcast is where I interview business leaders, CX pioneers, and the best designers who share their insight on creating business impact, having an edge on the customer experience. If you want more exclusive content and behind-the-scenes access, check out the Experience Edge podcast on YouTube and LinkedIn so you don't miss a thing. Now let's get back to the conversation.
All right, you should think about the ultimate benefits like satisfaction and customer counts going up, which is fantastic. But what would you see in the early side of the engagement, let's say 6 months in, 12 months in, like when you're doing the shift to like journey centricity, when you're bringing AI on top of that as a data model, like actually like helping your teams to basically work in unison, like what would be like the leading indicators that you are looking at? Like this is going in the right direction. Like anything specific that when people are like, especially in the early days of transforming this, like what they should be looking at, because not everyone is Lloyds and seeing the benefits of like something they have been championing and creating over the last years to get to this point. Like what would be some of the leading indicators?
I think one of the most satisfying, right, is actually like your employee satisfaction scores. Suddenly, like you get like the aha moments of the teams that you're working with to be like, oh my goodness, this was so much more painful before, or oh wow, you know, I really saw the benefit in working in this way, or collaborating with those teams, or being able to kind of events, significant events like agile events like PI planning, suddenly like it clicks for everybody and it's a lot smoother. And then as you start to kind of roll and you do it every quarter, and by the time you've got to kind of like 6 months in, everyone's like, yes, actually this is working. Like I can see the benefit of this. I can see how we're all working together. And people become like less stressed, less frustrated, and then you can start to see the upticks in the customer satisfaction as well, because like those like little experience improvements that we were saying, those little pain points, like start to go away. You start to be able to solve them faster because the communication within the teams is working a lot better. Your time to market gets quicker, and you're able to kind of free up time that was previously spent on just banging your head against a brick wall trying to get another team to kind of listen to you or talk to you or even find them in the first place. You're now able to spend that time on innovation, in creativity, in actually kind of coming together to solve like really interesting pain points and come up with really innovative and creative solutions. And that's when you create a much more kind of a differentiated experience for customers. So I think it really starts internally, and then it's a movement again, right, that kind of spills out to the customer.
I love that. You mentioned PI planning, right? The product increment planning. Like that's usually like a point of contention, right? Because the way it's been run for like years is usually like bottom up and then top down. People just pick and choose based on like you say, they say, here's a platform play we need to do. So it was definitely not customer centric. Then you come in with like this journey way of working where more teams are aligned to what really needs to happen and how that actually like helps the business. But those two modes typically come together in a PI planning. How have you seen the best ones? And maybe you can give examples. Like, how have you seen the best organizations solve this elegantly? Because some are still like operating almost in two modes, right? Where the discovery work is working seamless. People are generally enjoying it. But the moment the recommendations hit like the PI planning, we're still in the Stone Ages where it's like nothing that is truly moving the needle will get prioritized because teams have competing priorities, or we're doing this digital transformation piece in that part of the business and therefore everything gets priority. So what are the best doing to get that PI planning to be aligned with like the customer journey and therefore like that cross-functional priority?
Yeah, so I've seen a couple of different things. I wouldn't say that if anyone's seen it doing like the best. I think everybody is struggling with it in various different ways. And I think that the best ones have got kind of a key set of strategic priorities that everybody is sort of aligned to and knows what they're going after, and can align their particular kind of increment for that quarter to those. And so the best ones are kind of constantly referring back to it. We know what we're going after as an organization instead, or as a kind of part of our organization, and we can refer back to it. And then the second thing that I've seen work really, really well is making sure that you have time for strategy and innovation in each of those increments as well, and you're not just churning through like the immediate pain points, but you need to be spending time, and you need to give your teams space and time to be able to think about what's going on in 2 or 3 increments time, not just kind of like the immediate things on the ground. So don't use your entire capacity of the team to focus on now. We also need to be kind of with an eye on the future, and that is very difficult, I think, especially as teams overrun. It's quite difficult to just erode that time, but actually that time spent on that strategic thinking is super, super important.
Yeah, one of the examples I love to give always is like there's a German energy company, EnBW, and what they have done is very simple actually. They have a simple rule, and they said it can't be an epic on any roadmap that doesn't have a link to a customer journey.
Nice.
So, and what that does is, like, in the beginning, it was obviously like not all the journeys were known, not all the data was there, but it helped the product owners, the product managers to say, hey, but where in the experience does this fit, right? And today, fast forward to today, like, they have a clear strategy, they have a focus on, let's say, a couple specific experiences where they can truly make the difference for their customers, but also for the business. And that is then said, okay, how do your epics actually fit into that experience? And where does it actually sit? And making that link visible was like the thing they did early on, and that ultimately like led them to have this like almost like seamless experience between customer experience, between product, between service, and ultimately like between like fitting into the strategy and seeing actually are things moving the needle or not.
Yeah, I think that's a great example, and I think that kind of laddering up of journeys as well, because I think what we've seen quite a lot is that you might have your classic journeys, but then they need to kind of group up a level. And so I've seen some organizations that think about, as I said, like, I want to buy a home, and actually what are all the journeys under I want to buy a home, and how do they all work together? But then also, how do you create links with other journeys as well? For example, the kind of, I need to get insurance, or I need to get the other one, I need to get some of the other ones. And so kind of linking all of them up, making sure that you're kind of laddering up to key strategic priorities where you've grouped your journeys, and then also you've got the granularity like at the bottom layer as well. And I think that the forward-thinking organizations are really thinking about it at all of those different levels, rather than just thinking about those granular ones at the bottom.
How do you help your clients define ownership? I know this is like one of the spicy topics, right? Because the journey cuts across many of these teams. Like a product owner, like whether we like it or not, is clearly responsible for a product or a capability within a product, right? And he or she can, like, with the teams, pretty much make autonomous decisions on what to prioritize. The downside of it is that they don't look before and after their product experience usually. Then the journey comes in, and we're touching service, and we're touching research, and we're touching all the different parts of the org. So ownership is really hard because by definition it's cross-functional. Now, I've seen organizations put journey owners in place. I've seen organizations that say, no, we have like steering committees, we're organizing around value streams. I've also seen organizations that say, like, no, it's like a different way of organizing our data. We keep the team structure in place, but we have different ways that we come together to prioritize, which is like a change of the PI session, for example, or like there's a different monthly meeting where we actually like decide on specific strategic bets that we're making. Anyway, like I've seen many different ways. Like, what's your take on like how ownership should be distributed and what works well, especially in financial services?
Yes, yeah. Well, I have also kind of witnessed product owners being told that they're journey owners now, and having to kind of do a little bit of mental gymnastics to start to think of outside kind of their product box. Then a lot of them have been, jumped at that challenge and relished at that challenge. So yeah, I have seen a little bit of a movement. Again, it's all about the movements at the moment, isn't it? But a movement towards journey ownership and away from product ownership. But there have been a lot of kind of interesting conversations about what that means for the two. And I definitely think that there is still room for product ownership and journey ownership, within the same teams and within the same organizations, because some journeys might just be a product, especially if they are a little bit more specific to something like the KYC, the Know Your Customer tool, and how that might work. And so where I found kind of journey ownership to be most effective is where they're empowered. And I've seen two different models. I've seen kind of journey owners being given the role, but they're too junior, so they don't have kind of, and they're also new to, and maybe the organization is also new to journey ownership. So they're giving that to a quite junior person who suddenly has to kind of break down a lot of organizational silos and struggles to have the impact that they need to own that journey end to end. And then the other way I've seen it is that they've given it to a very senior person, great, but that they haven't freed up any of that person's capacity to do from their other roles. And so suddenly you've got a really senior person that, you know, has all of the kind of the teeth and the kind of tenacity that they need, but they just don't have the time to be able to dedicate it to a full-time role. So I think that the answer probably lives somewhere in the middle, right? You need a decently senior person, but then they also need to have the capacity to be able to do that. And you have to recognize that depending on what level that journey is, that could be, you know, a pretty significant role. So yeah, it's interesting. It's definitely still maturing, and I'm really interested in what the next iteration of a journey owner might be. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, what I'm seeing is like journeys used to be to what we have been discussing so far is like a way to organize people, right? It's like how, you know, we make decisions, how we come together, how we're seeing things from the same way, which is great. But now the next evolution is almost like journeys as a data model are extremely useful, because what we typically had was like where we started today. It's like 5 different systems to have all these different points of like, what is the customer interaction saying to us? What is the research telling us? What is the behavioral analytics telling us? Like, where is the business strategy? What is the business performance data telling us? Like, there's all these different systems that we try to get a piece of the answer. So what a journey typically does is like, that's the container. That's the structure of which all these pieces can flow into. So what I'm seeing is like, once a company has created this critical mass, we call it journey framework, right? Or like actually a model that is a representation of like the customer experience with all its like products or services or journeys inside of them. From I want to buy a home and all these different products and how people are actually like buying them, using them, or ignoring them. Once that's there and the data is in there, and then also roadmaps are tied to it, you actually have a good model. Now, that is very complicated for people, because in like a Lloyds Bank or Barclays, like there's so many different brands, so many different teams, like it's impossible for people to get overview of that. But for AI, it's pretty easy. So that structure is actually becoming a new phenomenon in many of these organizations, that they can put AI on top and then build agents to speed up the work, to help decision making, to keep like all that data accurate and really understand like, where do we, if I am in, let's take an airline, if I'm in the ancillary team here, but then the inspiration team puts a promo in there and sells a bag, that I'm aware of that and that the experience is connected in a way. That's typically unconnected, but AI is flagging that instantly. And I think like that's what I'm seeing as the next evolution. I'm curious to see like how you're seeing that with your clients, but like this ties into like the AI transformation that many go through, and journeys play a critical role in bringing specific data together that by definition are not correlated yet because they're in different systems, but now all of a sudden they get the position in a customer journey and now they belong to each other.
Yeah, so I was just imagining like, so the future journey owner, hopefully still human, but supported by a lot of agents, right, to be able to kind of to kind of bring all of that together. Interesting. So maybe it can continue to be that senior person then that has the clout in the organization.
Yeah, exactly. And the question is like, who builds the data model, and then who's responsible for that? And then I'm seeing like the customer experience team plays a role, or like the digital experience team, whatever the setup of the organization is. And then the question becomes like, who's using it? And the natural place where a lot of people are using it is product, because they are basing their roadmaps on what? Not just discovery on the features are used, but like how the experience is put together and how that actually shapes their decision. So I think that's fascinating. But also like simpler examples of where, okay, we have a lot of low value calls where we can't cross-sell, where we can't upsell. Those are typically problems that are upstream in the experience, but no one cares about them because they're not necessarily tied to like the cost we're incurring in our customer service or in our contact center. So how do we connect the dots? And that's, again, like where AI comes in. And those senior executives do care a lot about getting the cost down and getting the call minutes down from low value calls. So there's like the benefits of that I'm seeing that are not necessarily obvious, because journeys used to be a way to organize people. And now it's like, hey, it's a new data model that is actually useful for AI to go across these different teams and data to give us some answers that we haven't had access to prior.
Love that.
Fascinating. Shall we talk a little bit about craft, right? Because the role of researchers and designers is also changing, right? To your point. What does that do to the consultant's role, from like executing the work to designing the architecture? Like, what's your take on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're finding sort of clients are coming to us with two sides of the problem, right? So both what we design is changing, and what the experiences that we're creating is changing, and then also how we design is changing. And organizations are coming to us with kind of both of those problems, sometimes at the same time, wanting to know kind of how we should speed up the design of a specific thing and doing it in a specific way. And I think that as I said at the beginning of this conversation, right, the how we design is challenging because of the speed that the tools are evolving that we have access to, and organizations have kind of varying levels of comfort of bringing those tools on, and enabling the features and the functionalities of those particular tools. And so that kind of hampers a lot of practitioners, a lot of kind of designers, and frustrates them as well, because maybe at home they're able to do something an awful lot quicker kind of at the weekend on their home machine, and they're dabbling at home, and then they come to work and suddenly the brakes are put on, and that could be quite frustrating to them. And so but the rest of the organization are saying, oh, why are we spending so much time kind of in design or in research or in testing? We should be able to do this a lot faster. And then the people on the ground are saying, yes, we would love to do it faster, but IT or procurement or whoever it is has blocked kind of the entry of these particular tools. On the topic of craft, though, I think what's really interesting is that a sort of a new tool comes along that speeds up like a particular part of the process, and everybody sort of looks at that and goes, oh, fantastic, great. Therefore, we don't need to do that bit. We can just get a robot or an agent to do that bit. And that's the bit that worries me the most, right? Is when we start to skip over crafts because we think that we've replaced it with a tool. And therefore, you don't need that person to do that particular bit of it. And I think that sort of slow erosion of craft it does genuinely like keep me up at night, and it's a conversation that I end up having like time and time again, to be like, we can't just go from idea that somebody's had in a room to putting it in development in 24 hours, like, and putting it in front of a customer. I'm like, we can't just do that, right? There are checks and balances that we need to make sure as we go along that process to make sure that happens in the right way. There's risk, there's compliance, there's brand, there is the research, the UX that you might want to do, like all of these little bits, right? Some fully recognise that they have taken a long time in the past to get through all of those little bits, but what we should be doing is enabling those craft practitioners, those craft designers, or whoever it is, to use the tools that are going to speed up their process, and allow them to make sure that they are still bringing in that quality check that they need. So there was a really interesting report that came out a little while ago from Figma on the state of AI with designers, and when they surveyed the designers, they said yes, they fully recognise that they need to be up to speed with AI. They want to use all of the kind of ways that AI can make them more efficient, and they recognise the efficiencies that it could bring them, because there were a lot of really boring bits of their job that they now get taken away because they're automated. But what it doesn't always do is improve the quality of the output. And there were a lot less people that agreed with that statement, that it improved the quality of the output. And that's the bit that worries me, right? Because when you speed things up, and when you remove that kind of the craft and the understanding and the quality, then we end up with AI slop or undifferentiated products, or we've created like the same as everything else, right? Because Gen AI is there to create like the most obvious link to the next step, and if we always go with the most obvious link to the next step, right, we end up with something that's really undifferentiated. And so we need to make sure that the right governance, the right kind of processes and that are put in place to allow people to speed up their bit, but recognize that their bit was really important. So I think that is a fight that we're all going to continue to have, like internally over the next sort of year or so, as this starts to kind of level out. But what we really need to make sure is, in doing that, we don't just fire all of the junior people, because we don't need them to do that boring bit that the senior person used to give them, but we're still giving them the tools and the upskilling to make sure that they are able to take on kind of the next level of responsibility. And that is the challenge for the whole industry at the moment. It's like, how do you make sure that the junior people are upskilled in the things they need to be upskilled in? And that's recognizing quality over kind of AI slot, critical thinking, and then what we've got quite a few of the juniors on our team that are really like streets ahead of the rest of us at the moment is actually building kind of agents to do work and to put things together. So recognizing that that is a craft and that's a skill that they can bring to this as well, because like they have got kind of they've grown up with it almost, so they're kind of quite skilled in that. So it's like it's quite an interesting kind of place to be at the moment, but I definitely don't buy the organizations that are firing 20,000, 30,000 like of their workers because they think everything's going to be kind of driven by AI, because a lot of those organizations haven't actually seen that value realized yet. And so they're going to end up, I think, it's my own personal opinion, they're going to end up in a situation where they're going to be hiring all those people back in. And if I were one of those people that would be fired, my salary would go up 20%, 30%, 40% when they hired me back in. So yeah, it's a really interesting time, but I feel very, very passionate about kind of, as you probably guessed, right, about making sure that we kind of stay true to what we bring as humans, which is an understanding of kind of quality, differentiation, and creativity.
I love that. How are you thinking then in this scenario where, let's say, take the KYC example. I was like, I think this is fascinating, right? Maybe like this a different angle to it. So let's say we truly understand like the end-to-end KYC experience. We know like we want to keep it below 90 days. Let's say you're a big financial institution. So, and then you have all these different teams that are responsible for parts of it. Then we have all these metrics that we use to understand like how that part of the experience is actually like operating right now, what the experience is like. We get new feedback in, or researching continuously. Like, let's say all of that is in place and it's feeding that model. Mm-hmm. Can't it be that the person with a great idea just spins up an agent that talks to that part of the data model and says, hey, okay, well, great idea, but like, here's how I would execute it, and therefore this is the prototype. Boom, there it is. It's on brand. It's there for you to be like fitting into like risk and compliance policy. And we could potentially ship it to the customer. Now, what I'm saying basically is like, isn't that a potential future for many of our clients where they would have that in place? Now, the question is not like if, but it's more like, what's the spread of this? Like, does this become a reality for all of the businesses, or more of the standardized journeys like KYC? Is that going to be a reality? Like, how do you think about that?
I think it also depends on the change that you want to put in, right? So if it's like a small scale change, like some wording on something or something like that, sure, then you can imagine like the policy guardrails or the kind of the UX or the brand guidelines around that can be easily codified. And so you could rely on an agent to do that potentially, if the risk appetite of that part of the organization is okay with that going live without like a human seeing it. And I think that risk appetite is something that definitely kind of needs to be kind of revisited. But then on the other hand, if you're going for like wholesale change, if you're trying to reimagine a journey or a large part of the journey, like the amount of codifying of the rules engine, the policy engine, the brand, the UX, all of those kinds of guidelines that you would need to put in place versus hiring a team of like 2 or 3 people to do that for you. Like I worry that quite a lot of the time actually the ROI is just not lining up. So we have spoken to like a number of clients that are struggling to get out of pilot and phase of the kind of the AI initiative or the kind of the thing that they were trying to pilot. And when they looked at the cost of scaling that compared to the cost of hiring running a team of 5 people to do it, it just didn't stack up. And I'm seeing like more and more examples of that. So I think there needs to be a proportional investment into the things that you want to do, and recognizing kind of the human skills that can bring to that particular thing.
Right. So basically, like where we're still at is agents can do, or AI can do like the task level really well, like synthesize this, add this, create that, but like doing that end to end in a regulated industry like financial services, like that's going to be really difficult, because we're seeing all these examples, right? But it's usually like the tech startups doing all these crazy things with agents because there is no like risk assessment, there is no compliance. It's just like, it's fine to build and test and go, but like in a Barclays or a Lloyds, like it's incredibly difficult to do it right, and the backlash can be serious. That's what you're saying.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a reputational risk, but there's also regulatory risk as well. And in the UK we have the FCA, and they have a lot of kind of rules around ensuring good customer outcomes, around a piece of legislation called consumer duty, and the banks have very much have a duty to make sure that customers, all of your customers, have good outcomes from the journeys that you have. And therefore, there are a lot of checks and balances about any changes that you put into a journey, that you need to make sure that the kind of the risk and the control, the relevant controls are in that part of the journey. And so kind of having that entirely automated without any humans in the loop of that, I think is going to be a highly aspirational for a lot of these journeys.
How should we think about like the journey in general? Because like there can be so many like nuanced journeys. Like some simple experience can be like a million different versions, right? Depending on how people actually go through that experience, like on their own, using different parts of the tooling available. But because this is like what I'm hearing, it's like, okay, sure, the end experience for the customer is increasingly becoming conversational. It's inevitable that will be more and more in the coming years. How do we think about the nature of the customer journey of a tool that we use internally, to whether we use it to align teams or whether we use it to inform our agents on like what's connected to what? Like, how should we think about that?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that how somebody interacts with your journey is changing rapidly. So, but not for everybody. And I'd like to come back to that point in a minute because I think we get very excited about AI and how it's changing, especially organizations change, but the reality on the ground with your actual customers might be slightly different. But to come back to your original point, so they are definitely seeing, I think Adobe brought out a really interesting sort of state of AI report recently, which looked at how people are sort of changing how they find products and how they look for products, and looking away from sort of traditional search metrics and actually looking at AI in order to provide recommendations on things. So, Gemini has it at the beginning, right? They've created like their version of what they think like that answer, that question is. And so Google is now, Gemini kind of it gives you that response, which I think is really interesting. And I know there was a recent kind of court order to say, okay, well, therefore they're holding Google to that response as being the correct response, which I thought was a really interesting kind of change and could kind of change the way that Google provides their search results again. But so the way that your consumer sort of finds your product is changing, and then potentially the way that they might interact with it later on as you apply for something, to paper over the cracks of an onboarding process by making it a lot more conversational would be fantastic. I think would be really, really good. There are some organizations that have done it in a really lovely conversational way, but it's still a bit sort of chatbotty. But there's an organization called Lemonade, an insurance company that makes it like just really, really lovely and engaging. Also kind of Many Pets is a lovely one as well. They're a pet insurance, and the first thing that you do is you put in your pet's name and it goes, fantastic, okay, so how can I help Candy do this, and tell me about Candy. And they're really kind of using that as a way to kind of draw you in and make it feel like a really human experience. But all of these kind of channels are changing the journey. To come back to your original question, like they're changing how people kind of enter the journey, how they find the journey, and then maybe how they kind of navigate through it as well. And so what's quite interesting, I think, is that there are a lot of organizations that are having to kind of think about like answer engine optimization. So there are different ways that organizations sort of think about have to think about their content. It's not just SEO anymore, it's answer engine optimization. And so kind of how does your organization show up in ChatGPT or in Gemini? Have you tried that? Have you seen, like, is it listed as one of the top ones? I recently asked it for a recommendation on the best current account, and I got 3 different answers from 3 different engines, which was quite interesting, and they were all sort of pulling on from different things. And so that's something that an organization has to grapple with, and then obviously the journey itself. But I think where kind of customers when you're in the design process have struggled a little bit is thinking about all of those different channels, and how you might apply that onto a journey, which is by design 2D and quite linear. And so I think that is changing quite a lot as people have different entry points into the journey and have different channels that they might want to drift, which all produce different pain points in itself. So I'm interested, Jochem, in your kind of thoughts around that. Like, as the journey starts to kind of explode upwards and outwards, like, how have you seen that being addressed?
Yeah, so to your point, like it's 2D by design. It's actually 3D, right? When you think about it, like the orientation is 2D. It's like, okay, you go from left to right through phases and steps to really like get an abstraction on like what is happening before, during, and after any specific like moment that really matters, or like where the actual product gets bought, whatever it is. And then the layers in that journey are like, okay, where are my insights? What are the metrics I'm tracking? How are my roadmap items linking up to like that? But behind each of these is a system, right? Is a system of record. It's like a system of feedback sending that data through. Is a system of business performance that is like tracking certain KPIs that is sending that data through, right? So by definition, like it's multi-dimensional. But what I'm thinking, and I'm seeing on the ground, is like people care less about how that model looks. It's more like, is the data inside it accurate? And then the next question becomes is like, who is actually basing their decisions, their roadmap items, their changes in the policies on knowing what the customer experience is like and how that maps onto the business? I mean, that's the strategic question above all of this. So it becomes less of like, oh, we need to understand the journey for this thing. Oh, there's all these different entry points, and oh, someone does it through like a GPT, and the other person just traditionally calls us to have the same interaction. Like, it's almost irrelevant. It's like, what is the actual context that we need to understand about how people are doing it today, about how people are starting that journey, ending that journey, how many people go through that, and how we actually want to serve the customer there. Look, those fundamental questions have not changed. It's just the channel that is changing. So therefore, if we're thinking about like an abstraction model, I mean, a dashboard from all the potential data that you're capturing about your customer, like a dashboard is an abstraction. It says like, does this bar go up or down the next month, right? That's the question. Oh, it goes down. Oh, what might be underneath that, right? So there's still like the figuring out stage to be done. And I think like that's the same for a journey as a tool to align teams to bring data together that's used to be like fragmented. So the question then becomes, from all the potential entry points, what are the 3 main ones where the most volume goes through? And maybe like GPT is a new entry point. Okay, great. Well, maybe there is this content team that is optimizing for showing up in that like conversation, but that's just a tiny bit of change. It's not a big change. People still need to buy a mortgage or get a mortgage because they want to buy a home, right? That hasn't changed. So I think like that's the question that teams are answering in the wrong way often. It's like, oh, because there's so many new possibilities and so many new channels, we need to have so many more journeys. And that's usually not the right way to think about it. It's like, no. Yeah. What is all the data that we're capturing? How is that shaping up like the changing needs of our customers? And how do we prioritize that against what we as a business stand for, what we want to achieve this year? And how do we then bring those 2 things together? And I think like journeys are a great way to do it faster rather than to go through all these different tools and systems to get like my answer. So you have a data model, and that should actually, like when you've set it up correctly, should feed you with like a real insight, not like, oh, customers are using GPT more than Google search to find our mortgage. Like that's not a real insight. But the insight is, what's the implication to the business? So when you layer on your metrics and you understand what the roadmaps are at, you can say, hey, we should invest in this more, but the downside of it would be not doing that thing that we wanted to do, and therefore that team has a problem, and therefore the cost is higher. So therefore we're deciding against it. That's the thing that you use journeys for, not to be clear on like what is all the possibilities that our customers are going through. So anyway, long-winded answer of like the world hasn't changed that much. People still need to buy mortgages. The way they do it is changing, and that will always be the case, as it has been for the last 20 years. When mobile came along, people started to do discovery on their mobile phones, so we had to design ways to be relevant there. So, and now with AI, that is shifting again.
Yeah, so interesting. So I do kind of encourage my teams to think of it as another channel, but then also think about how it might reinvent the rest of the journey as well.
Yeah, and those journeys will change, and people will have like their own consumer agents at some point, right? That are doing maybe like the discovery piece or even the contract handling at some point, right? It's not something that we can't see that might be true in the future. But again, people still want to buy mortgages. I'm still a large bank. I still have multiple products. I still want Julia to have multiple of those from us and not from my competitor. So how do we make sure our teams are making the right decisions? How do we make sure their teams are building the right things so that Julia is actually buying that additional product? She's satisfied with it. She's using it, and she's not considering leaving us anytime soon.
This is a really hot topic at the moment. Tokens versus time. And I think it's having ramifications across the whole industry, both the kind of the consulting model of how we used to kind of sell time, and now we're thinking about actually if we've accelerated something but we've incurred costs because we're using certain tools, like how do we kind of reflect that in the value that we provide to our clients? But then also, as you said, you've got CFOs at kind of all of these organizations, and then maybe you've got kind of internal leadership teams that have really encouraged people to use AI as much as possible, and then the CFOs are seeing that token budget going up and up and up. And I know there were some high-profile ones recently, like Uber, who burnt through like their entire budget in the spring that they had for the entire year. Other organizations that have told people to please only use AI when you should or when you need to, because you don't have to use it for everything. And then other organizations that are still, I think, maybe a bit late to this, that are they're still having leaderboards of who can burn through the most tokens as possible, which I think is the most ridiculous thing. Because like who can burn the most money as possible, and then obviously you've got people that are kind of gaming that system to be like, yeah, I've got AI doing all kinds of crazy stuff, and I'm going to be at the top of that leaderboard. So I think we're at a little bit of a turning point at the moment, especially kind of Anthropic changed their business model, changed the way that the data is being charged and the tokens are being charged. I was having a conversation recently with someone where they were talking about how they use different models for different things because they have different usage requirements. And so actually trying to find the most efficient model across all of those to do the tasks that they wanted to. And they were sort of talking about kind of some of the cheaper AI models that they could find from different parts of the world. So some of the Chinese ones are fantastically efficient and therefore don't use as much data. And so potentially like the next iteration of technology is going to be something that looks across all of those models and then does that work for you, to make it the most efficient way that you can. So I think that there were a lot of, I think, we're at a bit of a turning point now. There was a lot of excitement about building like fantastically complicated agentic systems, and then somebody realized that actually that's going to cost a fortune, and it's going to continue to cost more and more money. To come back to my earlier example, CFOs are looking at that very critically now, and they're looking at compared to the cost of the people that they are employing or had previously employed. So that kind of tokenomics is something that I think we can expect to hear an awful lot more about over the next couple of months. It's really going to be a hot topic. And then thinking about kind of what does that mean for the ROI of the things that we have in pilot, and the value that we want to get out of these particular initiatives as well. So there is very much kind of like an eye-opening kind of deep breath moment now as we start to really look more critically at the business cases of the initiatives and the things that we want to pull in.
Do you expect the businesses to, when they're working with their software vendors, to bring their own AI to it, or do you think it will be more of a cap model like Uber, right? Okay, we cap it at $1,500 a month per engineer, and that's about it. What do you expect to happen in the clients that you're working with?
I think it depends on the ambition of the company itself and I also think it depends on the department as well. So I think that they will probably kind of throttle some departments more than others. And then it also depends on kind of how intensively the tools are that particular team is using. So, we're talking about some of the development tools like Claude Code and those kinds of ones can be quite intensive, can be quite hungry. But some of the smaller ones, like the tools that are embedded in sort of, in Figma and Miro and they do and other ones like that, are much more can be much more cost effective. So I think CFOs need to start to look at it kind of across the board and see where they're getting the most value for money.
Yeah, no, I'm seeing the same. We're dabbling with doing some research where we're saying, hey, if you maximize your context window all the time by bringing all these like complex data together and like build like little applications on top of that, like ultimately you're going to spend a lot more than having an optimized model that helps you to really understand like how these things are related to the customer journey. And then answers are like very, very cheap, and reasoning over that can be very, very cheap. But to achieve that, like you still need to go through like different steps. So I want to end there today. We recently announced the strategic alliance between Deloitte and Dado, which is exciting, especially now considering like journey centricity, but also maximizing the effectiveness of AI is like the two streams that are coming together. Julia, if people want to know more or are in financial services, especially in the UK, and they think like, we need to talk because we have the problems that you described today. We are making these changes and we want to have you help them. Like, where should they reach out to you? Where can they find you?
Absolutely. You can find me on LinkedIn, or you can find me kind of in Deloitte London. So just look me up and give us a call, and I'd be happy to have a conversation.
Thank you. You were fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me on.
All right, and that's it. Thank you so much for listening. If you found this valuable today, don't forget to subscribe to The Experience Edge on your favorite podcast channel, leave a review, and share it with your team. I'd be delighted. Today's episode was brought to you by Dado, the AI journey management solution for enterprise. To have an edge on your business strategy and to know why your customers do what they do, visit dado.com and explore more resources to accelerate your customer experience game. And remember, the journey to creating customer-centric impact never ends, and here's always a new edge to discover in doing things differently. Next week, new episode. Until then, keep pushing the edge and stay inspired. See you in the next episode.